Did you not hear that? So I'll just start again. Hi, welcome to Global Trends in Performance Management. My name is Julie Sloan. I'm the Chief Executive Officer, Workforce Planning Global, and Quentin O'Grady will be co-presenting with me today. He's the Global Lead and organisational Global Lead Analytics and Organisational Design person at Workforce Planning Global. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much to FAHR, the HR Club, for this initiative. It's a really important topic, and certainly we hear about it through our global clients regularly. And I know many of us are now re-energised at this time that we're, moving out of the COVID environment into some new positive approaches to what's been happening at work. And so these sorts of issues will have an impact in how we revert to that. I also would like to thank World at Work for their seamless professional organisation to arrange this for us and to have this happening for you. It's late afternoon here in Australia, but I know it's morning for you. So I hope you've all got some caffeine or whatever you need to help you listen to this input for the next hour or so. I thank you participants as well for giving us your time and your interest in this topic. And at the end of the session, we'll allow question and answer time, but also we're very happy for you to approach World at Work and ask them if you have other questions. They will then forward them to us. So as I've said, here's the screen that just describes us. OAM means an Order of Australia medal, which I received for my work in workforce planning, and FARI means a Fellow of the Australian Human Resource Institute. Quentin O'Grady will introduce himself, and then he will take over the first part of the session, and then I'll come back on when we start talking about international initiatives in standards that relate to people performance. All right, thank you.
Everyone, so Quentin O'Grady, I partner with Julie Sloan as a workforce planning consultant, and our organisation helps other organisations, large and small, to embed workforce planning and human resource strategies to help improve the sustainability of their workforce and also performance. We're going to focus today's session on the link between workforce planning and performance management, and how performance management is not just about the individual performance of an employee or staff member, but how you can start to embed practices and disciplines around your workforce planning approach to help improve performance over the long term. So a little bit about workforce planning and the context with which I'm going to talk to and how it relates to performance management. There's 6 core elements around workforce planning, the first being workforce strategy, and I'll go into each in a second. Supporting frameworks, workforce design, operational workforce planning, demand and supply of your skills and capabilities and workforce analytics. So if we think about workforce strategy as that first component, what is usually in scope of workforce strategy are things like understanding the future of work, what is happening at an industry level in terms of trends, environmental scanning, what are the expectations of industry, consumers, and also employees. Organisational strategy, so what do we need to do to connect the workforce to where the organisation's heading, how that organisation's pursuing its particular operating model and how it operates, and then what that looks like in terms of a workforce strategy, having considered those things. How that relates to performance management is essentially staff are more likely to perform if they possess the skills and capabilities required for a role and the attributes to be able to operate within that environment, and also across that industry, organisation, whatever it might be, whatever context you're operating in. So as part of workforce planning, how that helps prepare and set the foundation, it's important to understand things like the future of work, so that when you're designing your workforce, you're making decisions around your talent acquisition, recruitment, and learning and development investments, you have that with a clear understanding around the capabilities needed into the future. The attributes of staff needed to operate in a future environment. An example of that might be the ability to flex with different priorities, having a breadth of capability and skills as opposed to just a specific narrow skill set. The skills and capabilities that are to become redundant or less needed into the future, so you can start to make decisions around what capabilities you stop investing in and stop recruiting, and the transition strategy for that organisation or industry and the specific refresh needs. So if an organisation is moving or an industry is changing as it embraces different ways of working, consumer needs, or improvements to technology, it's important to evolve that workforce to build the skills and capabilities to enable the platform for individuals to perform. And so you're making the right selection decisions to set those individuals up. This is very detailed, so I won't go through it, but it just gives you a little bit of a blueprint in terms of how you might think about understanding that future of work, and therefore what your priorities need to be in terms of investing in skills and capabilities of your workforce. There's 5 key elements that we typically look at, but it's not limited to that. So the first one is around service model. How's your organisation delivering its services and what it needs to do? The structure of your organisation, how you're going to source those skills and capabilities. So, examples might be making a decision not to recruit a particular skill as an employee, but getting external support if that's not your core business or your enduring skill and capability need. The impact of technology, and what does that mean in terms of the expectations on employees, the skills and capabilities that we need people to use to augment with that technology, and also what are the skills and capabilities we need from our staff that are new and that technology will replace, and therefore we need to start evolving that workforce. And then we've got things like new roles that are going to start to exist in the future, and understanding what that means for capability, understanding what that means if you need to transition your current workforce into new roles, and build the skills and capabilities and knowledge for those employees to be able to perform effectively in those new types of environment. Moving on to the second component, which is around supporting frameworks. And these are things that include your regulations, employment policies, workforce types that you can use, the different types of workforce options, and your remuneration and classification structure. What I mean by that is how much you pay a certain role or skill, and consistent and equitable grading across for similar work. So in terms of what that looks like in a performance context, for employers to perform well, it's important for them to understand what the expectations are on them and what good performance looks like. So what we see that in terms of case studies that work well are companies and organisations that have a combination of what's called work level standards. So if you're at a particular grade or classification or remuneration band, there's certain standards that are consistent, and capability frameworks relevant to that organisation and industry. So if we look at it in terms of how they sit side by side, the work level standards reflect and describe what is expected of individuals in terms of performance and what that looks like in terms of outcome. And the capability framework looks at it from a personal lens. So what are we asking that individual to have in terms of skills and capabilities, and the behaviours that they demonstrate that meet and match up with those work level standards. They work better if it's contextualised to that organisation or industry rather than just being generic across different types of work. So what that looks like in a practical sense, your work level standards will typically be structured around specific grades and levels. And there's various descriptors around what we expect in terms of accountability, knowledge, stakeholder management and decision making, and they will vary depending on the responsibility of the individual role. Reward and recognition systems that are aligned to performance and create the motivation for employees to aspire further. A framework of capabilities, skills, and work-related qualities required to work at specific levels. So that if you're looking at it from the perspective of being clear with employees and staff around what is expectation, not just at their level, but at different levels, so that they can start to have clarity on that, and the expectations to be able to move forward through and up into different levels throughout the organisation. And a system to capture the skills and capabilities that staff have in order to determine the gaps and or barriers to performance. So the best case studies essentially are able to demonstrate we have clear expectations of our employees at certain levels. We have a clear capability framework that describes the behaviours and skills and capabilities we want. And we reward our employees that demonstrate the skills and capabilities that are going to be critical moving forward into the future. So you're starting to embed motivational components for employees to start to transition and learn those skills that are going to be more critical into the future. The third element I'll talk to is around workforce design. That impacts performance in the following ways. Organisational and divisional key performance indicators set the standards with which employees need to be measured. Loose job design can create unclear standards and performance objectives. So that an example of that is if employees have too much autonomy, their job design isn't well designed or well crafted or clear in terms of the scope and expectations, that can lead to misunderstanding between what the expectation is from the organisation and what is produced by the individual. Bureaucratic structures and work practices stifle productivity, limit on-the-job experience, and in some cases create narrow skill sets that inhibit mobility. What I mean by that is if there's too much bureaucracy in an organisation that doesn't enable employees to use the skills and capabilities, that will then impact on that performance of that individual. It can also limit on the job experience. So if we're narrowing the reality of someone's role and not enable them to work at the level that we ask them to, that can limit their on-the-job experience and then start to then erode your capability. And in some cases, if we're asking people to just stay in a little small component of the role and not experiencing other elements of the business, that can then start to only make them an expert in one small discipline. And when you need to be able to flex and mobilise staff, that then creates longer term issues for the organisation moving forward. Work allocation should be at the lowest appropriate level to ensure staff are utilising skills regularly and growing through on-the-job experience. So that's about leadership capability, appropriately delegating, making sure that the individuals have the right balance between autonomy, but also governance and risk management for the organisation to ensure that they can work to the highest scope of their role, skill, and capability. The workforce mix should evolve with the business to ensure the right skill mix. So if, for example, organisations start to replace people that leave and they don't think about whether or not that job needs to be redesigned because the team, the service, or the organisation has changed, and start just replacing like for like, makes it much more difficult for the organisation to evolve, and also you're not capitalising on opportunities to grab additional skills and capabilities that you might need moving forward. And feedback should be regular on specific work on an iterative basis, not formal, scary processes a couple of times a year. So performance conversations with leaders and clients and stakeholders and peers and colleagues should be regular, and it should be destigmatized in a safe environment so that it's very clear not personal, but very objective and is aligned to those clear expectations. The fourth component, operational workforce planning, is essentially what does it mean? What is the role of HR to support the business in evolving the workforce? So essentially what that relates to is the best organizations that we work with and we see is that they evolve their workforce mix, their investment mix in terms of the roles and the skills and capabilities to changing priorities. So when they have a rich idea in terms of what their business needs moving forward, which is aligned to their strategy, they take opportunities to review what that looks like in terms of the expectations of employees, the skills and capabilities that need to be prioritized, how they change their investment mix in learning and development to build those skills and capabilities, and they start to embrace ways that exposes their current employees to different work so that they're setting them up to continually develop to improve their ability to perform. The workforce is mobilized to flex with evolving needs, peaks and troughs in work. So the culture of the organization enables, and there's an expectation that employees are there to move based on changing priorities and the nature of work, rather than sitting in one position doing one task all the time, which ultimately de-skills. And changing business priorities are translated into specific workforce changes by the HR department. So HR partners with the business areas to work with them to understand where the business is heading, to start to then understand the specific actions that need to be taken, whether to replace a position, whether to work with individuals to improve their skills and capabilities, whether there's particular structures in place in the organisation that are barriers to performance as well. So there's quite a strong role for HR to work within that. The fifth element is around demand and supply. So that's really, if you can get your demand and supply right and as close as possible, that essentially starts to minimize instances where organizations starting to recruit non-ideal candidates. So what I mean by demand and supply is understanding the future needs. That's your demand picture. You understand your current availability, so that's your current workforce in terms of your internal supply, and then overlaying a future anticipated availability around future supply. So what do we think is in the market? What do we have internally? Where do we think our risk factors are in terms of being able to evolve with the skills and capabilities and the attitudes and attributes of our staff to be able to deliver on our business strategy? And start to work to build a pipeline of capability, whether that might be a better presence in the market, it might be engaging with education providers to be able to articulate these are the skills and capabilities we need. Many organisations and industries struggle with a misalignment between the job readiness of candidates. So the education sector has not evolved at the pace of business or industry. And there's a big gap in terms of what organisations and industries need to fill to get those graduates job ready and to work effectively in a performance context. So if you can start to minimise that time and proactively influence the demand and supply picture, you're able to then improve your hit rate in terms of ideal candidates and minimise the gap between job readiness and graduates finishing their study. And using that from an evidence-based perspective as opposed to gut feel is always important to be able to create that business case when you're working with the executive and or stakeholders. And the sixth element is around workforce analytics, which can include anything from reporting, analysis and insights, decision support, and being a strategic driver. Workforce analytics is traditionally used to inform HR metrics, things like leave, attrition, workforce numbers. The best organisations we work with essentially are able to integrate their workforce data with their business and financial data to create a more holistic, integrated approach. This then enables you to get better linkages between your workforce performance and your business outcomes and your business performance, and to be able to identify causal and correlating factors between what is seen between the workforce skill, capability, supply, and readiness, and the performance of the business. Then that can also translate down into more specific organizational KPIs that you can start to evolve with the business, and then integrate and link that back into the employee KPIs through their performance agreements or development plans to ensure it's more agile and sharper focus, as opposed to just rolling over the same expectations each year. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Julie Sloan to talk about international standards.
Thank you, Quentin. I'll just take the next slide if you don't mind. So the International Standards Organisation, or International Organisation of Standardisation, depending on which way you want to say it, has a Human Resources Committee called TC260. Now, many of you may be aware of how international standards are put together, and some of you may not. So there's a lot of information behind ISO, and you can certainly dig deeper into that and find out. But essentially, this Human Resource Management Committee is concerned about people in the workplace. And so they've developed a business environment that they've developed that they use to underpin each of the standards that are written and are relevant for human resource management. So I was Australia's representative to the ISO for about 11 or so years. And in that time, I was around most of the international standards that are written now. There's been a few more recently that I was in the early stages of. However, and I don't necessarily advocate that you go and get them all. What I'm suggesting is that you be mindful of the fact that they exist, because in the absence of regulation or legislation in your country around the people management and people, performance management, you may be able to find aspects that are relevant to you in an international standard. And so in the absence of those legislation and regulation, an international standard does create a very solid platform from which you can assert that, this is the language you're going to use around this topic, or this is the guidelines that you're going to use to apply to your organisation. So I'll just walk them through quickly because I don't want to detract too much from the core content of today. The next slide has the list of each of the slides, Quentin, each of the standards. So there are, and as you'll see, the years that they were written, 2016, 2018, and they move along to, I think there was some developed in 2019. Obviously, with the COVID, there was a few, there's a bit of a gap in a year or two there. But, human resource management vocabulary, well, that's a very useful document. So if you're having arguments in the workplace about what performance management means, or what workforce planning means, or all sorts of things, what onboarding means, they've already been defined. And so the countries that are involved in writing the standards, there's roughly 28 countries, and the subject experts from each country come together to put these together. So it's not just a whim. It's actually quite solid, well discussed and debated definitions for the use of the language in each one of the standards. And that includes the metrics that are used to measure performance measurement, also used in workforce planning. So you can see there knowledge management system requirements, human resource management guidelines for recruitment, right from early engagement, onboarding through to exit. Quite a neat process in that. Guidelines on human governance. Often Quentin and I are in an environment where there is a great desire for quality performance management and workforce planning, but the governance around it is a bit, perhaps it's legacy behaviour or thereabouts. So again, it's nice to have a look at what there is for human governance. The most relevant one to you today is the 30409 2016 on workforce planning. Now, as I said, I was the lead writer on that and led the 28 countries that contributed. That is a method, if you like. It's a process to follow, which is still relevant, but it has evolved enormously since this was actually launched. So right this year, I understand from the ISO, I was speaking to some people the other day, they said, yes, we're about to review the workforce planning standard, but what that means, it might be another 2 to 3 years before it is produced as a new standard. So at the minute, the 2016 3049 is the one for you to look at. The other ones are the guidelines for internal, external human capital reporting 2018, and that's a very solid standard. I'd recommend that one. It actually is about a guide for different size organisations, large, medium, small, about what is fair for them to report in relation to their workforce, and that will include management, and performance and all of those elements. The next slide just adds a couple more which were recently launched. I'll just have a look that I identified as being relevant to performance management. And this is a 2020 standard, assessing service delivery. There's 2 elements to it, and one is about people in work and organisational settings, the requirements for the client, and the second one is for requirements for service providers. So a very useful one for you to look at if you have a particular strong interest in that. And the diversity and inclusion standard, which was launched in 2021 as well. I was around that one very early stages, around about 2016, 17. And I understand that's just been launched and is really worthwhile. So that's really enough for you, but I just want to make sure you didn't miss that important information. It's a strong resource and it's a solid resource. And so I recommend you have a look at that. Thank you, Quentin. Back to you.
Thanks, Julie. So what we also thought might be useful for participants is to go through a little bit of practical and tangible detail, just so you can start to translate what that might look like in terms of a framework sense. What we've produced here is a table with some techniques to help future-proof performance. And we've split it up into those typical categories and how they might look in terms of an application. So the first one we'll look at is around contemporary job design. So if an organisation is expecting an employee to perform in a modern, contemporary way, it's important that the job design is also considered and how that might be influencing A, the recruitment of that individual, B, the skills and capabilities that are being applied day in, day out to do that job, and also what that looks like in terms of the evolution moving forward and the investment in those skills. So some of the things you can think about depending on where you're at as an organisation is to define what the job looks like now and into the future. Set clear expectations for that individual in terms of what that means to help bring them forward through into that future environment. And aligning development and investment priorities to future skills. So considering what your learning and development budget looks like, where those investments are, and challenging whether or not that is more typically related to how you've previously invested, or whether that is aligned to what you're going to need into the future, because it does take years to be able to build that skill from that initial seed investment. Related to that is around the future capabilities. So embedding a capability framework to define the desired skills, capabilities, and attributes of your staff that you want them to perform against. Assess capabilities of current and prospective staff through recruitment or talent acquisition to determine their future potential against future needs. So not just thinking about whether they have the skills and capabilities today, but do they have the skills and capabilities and or the potential to be able to move and evolve to those future needs as an indicator as to their relative chance of success in terms of strong performance. And then at an aggregate level, what that looks like for your organisation. Establish reliable mechanisms and processes to maintain that visibility to ensure the workforce evolves and doesn't become stale. So that can be a combination of your recruitment, your workforce planning, your learning and development to be able to continue understanding what you're looking at in terms of your workforce as it relates to what you need moving forward. And you're constantly capturing that information and intel. Performance process itself. So regular work-based conversations and collection of data as opposed to just formal processes. Personal development plans that recognise diversity and are aligned to future of work. Flexible performance measures aligned to organisational objectives, not just tasks. So we're wanting to be able to, the performance measures that people have in their performance and development plans are actually, there's clear line of sight and clear linkage to changing organisational objectives. And objective assessments that consider the reach and impact of employees, not just self-nominated stakeholders. So considering who's assessing that performance, as opposed to just having one person assess it. There's other ways you can assess that and get a more rich repository of that in terms of whether or not an individual who's a high performer to be able to impact other areas of the business and being able to capture those insights. And reward and recognition. So not just remuneration, not just money, but thinking about the reward systems that not only recognise your immediate performance, but also the alignment and evolution of individuals within the business. So you're rewarding employees that are committed to moving with the business and those changing needs and developing themselves in alignment with that. Reward systems that recognise agility and flexibility. So this is the attributes of the individual as opposed to skills and capabilities, and their willingness to adapt and move with the business and change in relation to changing priorities. And manager reward balance to consider both employee performance and team culture. So when thinking about your reward and recognition system, thinking about what is it that we want managers to do, and that's about developing the skills, capability, and performance of their staff. So thinking about a manager reward system that rewards that rather than just them as individuals. International good practice. This is a generic overview in terms of what we typically see in organisations with good practice. They tend to essentially break it up into three components to make it digestible in chunk size format for the executive. Areas for attention. What are the big ticket items we need to prioritise that's going to get us where we need to move? Areas to monitor. It's going okay at the moment, but we probably need to ensure that that doesn't slip any further. And areas well placed. Things that are happening well that need to continue to be fertile in that respect, but we don't need to prioritise too much with that. In terms of key components as it relates to people, ensuring people have the opportunity to be empowered and use the skills and capabilities to the best of their ability. Thinking about attrition. So as employees leave, should I replace that exactly the same as what it was, or should I be thinking about the skills and capabilities I'm going to need into the future to help improve business performance? Capability, having a repeatable succession management process so that when you have critical people filling critical roles, they're not holding the skills, capabilities, and knowledge to themselves, but you're spreading that knowledge and capability on an ongoing basis through succession planning, so to ensure that you're able to manage that risk and you're not dependent on one individual. And that relates to broadly the capability and supply pressures and how you change the nature of your investment. The structure, so your workforce mix, thinking about what organisational performance looks like, and therefore what does it mean from a workforce mix perspective, as opposed to just keeping your org structure and replacing vacant positions to improve your access to specific skills and therefore your organisation to improve in those areas. and workforce design. So putting in the mechanics for people to perform, which is exposure to a broad range of tasks, so that when they're asked to do that next time, they're able to contribute, on-the-job development and decision-making at the right levels to ensure that what we're asking people to do, they're doing it based on expectation and the organisation is getting good value for money on an ongoing basis. We've just put together a little bit of a 5-step process in terms of what that looks like in a workforce planning and performance context. So the first component is understanding your current and future need. That's where your critical skills are identified, prioritised and articulated, and the right workforce options are used to manage risk and agility. The second component is around creating the frameworks to create the motivation to perform and evolve. So frameworks set the acceptable standards for accountability, quality, capability, and professional expertise, which underpin the ability to perform. And reward systems are adaptable enough to evolve with the business need, affordability, and individual staff circumstances. Third component, as we move through, is the strategic development of that capability. So we understand now, step 1, we create the framework. Step 2, step 3 is now develop the capability to help performance. That's investment priorities in particular areas we need moving forward. The redundant skills begin to decline and we align recruitment processes to that effect. So if we're starting to see pockets of the workforce where those skills and capabilities are becoming less and less important or less and less impactful, you start to make decisions around we're moving the business in this direction, therefore we're investing in these skills and capabilities, and therefore everyone is on the same page in terms of replacing that position or reinvesting somewhere else. Future skills are celebrated, so you're motivating people to gain those skills that we need for the future, and the workforce grows according to your design that we've put together in step 1, all impacting not just the individual's ability to perform, but at the aggregate level, the organization's performance. The culture, the fourth component is the culture enables the staff to perform. So this is about leadership, culture, expectations, and working in a day-to-day environment. Staff are empowered to use their skills and perform. So there's nothing worse than having a very highly skilled, capable person that isn't able to perform or use those skills because of highly controlled environments. It's about trying to find the right balance between empowerment and autonomy to do what you do best with those skills, but also managing the risk and governance and internal processes. Either too far either way on that spectrum then starts to create those issues. Leaders are assessed by the team's performance, succession risk and readiness, and capability. So thinking about how a leader is rewarded, thinking about not just what they've delivered in terms of volume or revenue or service, but what does their impact on the team look like in terms of developing and building that capability as a whole, not just specific quantitative results. And staff are celebrated for contribution, not just leaders, to create that extra level of motivation. To where we typically see with those components integrated into systems, the capability and performance grows, where the systems and the decisions from a corporate perspective make it more difficult not to perform because we've clearly articulated what we want, we've invested in the capabilities that we need, and we're making the right decisions in terms of bringing the skills and capabilities up to a level to be able to then apply more efficiently and more professionally. And then a culture of adaptability and mobility that broadens capability and organizational agility, so that you're able to respond with shorter timeframes and with greater professionalism. Typically what you might think about in terms of what that looks like from a point A to point B, so point A being now for your organisation and point B being into the future, is to think about a current versus future state assessment. We've put together a simple overview in terms of where you can to get you started. The first one being knowledge and adoption of guidelines for relevant standards across the globe. Thinking about how you currently understand that and what the importance of that is into the future. Regular and quality workforce planning and insights to try and understand, do I actually know what I need from my workforce into the future in terms of performance standard outcomes and therefore the relative skills and capabilities. Contemporary job design as a subset to that second point, what does that then look like in terms of the jobs within my organisation and the expectations, the development investment priorities, the work level standards, everything that I need to be able to objectively and relevantly assess the performance of my current and future workforce, and then tie that into my talent acquisition processes so that we're starting to bring in those skills and capabilities as opportunities arise. Then in a more micro sense, what does that look like in terms of future capabilities? So do I have a capability framework that defines the desired skills, capabilities, and attributes? And does that, if I do, is that relevant for the future, or do I need to evolve that? Am I able to assess the capabilities of my current prospective staff? And do I have reliable mechanisms and processes to maintain this visibility, or am I doing it as in points of time that I need to continue to refresh as you start to move and evolve as a business? From the performance process itself, am I having regular work-based conversations and collecting that data as opposed to just formal processes once a year? Performance development plans recognize diversity and are aligned to the future of work. So what is it that I'm developing my staff in? Is it going to help them evolve and future-proof their performance? Or are they just developing the same things that is going to become redundant over time? Flexible performance measures aligned to organizational objectives, so clear line of sight to what your organization needs to deliver, not just a list of tasks that's developed at the local level. Objective assessments that consider the reach and impact of employees, so not just what the team leader or the manager thinks of them, but what does the rest of the business, what's their experience? Are they getting what they need from that role, that individual, that team? Reward and recognition. So from a non-salary, non-monetary sense, thinking about reward systems that recognize immediate performance, but also the alignment of the evolution with individuals in the business. So is my reward system adaptable in that context? Reward systems that recognize agility and flexibility, so the attributes of people to be able to contribute and move as the organization needs. And the manager reward is balanced to consider not just their performance as a leader, but also how their staff are developing and evolving to be able to perform into the future. So that's the formal part of the process. We have left some time for questions that you can put into the chat, and we're happy to work through those individually.
And also, if you want to go back to any of the slides that are particularly meaningful for you, we're happy to flick back to those. So, for example, the future of work example was a slide that often attracts a few questions. The work level standards slide, and also the checklist. Sometimes people say, how can we go through those? So we've got some questions. That's good. Thank you.
So we've got a question asking for a soft copy. So we will prepare something to be able to send to participants. The next question we've got is, can we use this strategy in all profit and non-profit organizations? The answer to that is yes. In our experience, we work with profit and non-profit, government, private, across all industries and sectors. And the answer is essentially there may be some tailoring or some prioritization in terms of what you use, but ultimately the framework and the structure is fairly consistent. We have another question. What is the best possible way to make recruitment system effective? Ultimately, the recruitment leadership and the business leadership need to have quite open, honest and aligned conversations in terms of where the business is heading. If recruitment is just getting a vacancy from business, fill this position, and then going out and filling it, they can only recruit to the quality that the business have asked them to. So it's important that HR work with the business to be able to map out that future in terms of what that looks like, so that when business are engaging HR to do recruitment, they're able to adequately anticipate and articulate what is the skills and capabilities that they need to be prioritized to be able to then enable recruitment to go and find the right candidate. Next question is, can we use it to evaluate our staff performance? You can. Essentially, it's important to set clear expectations though. So within those checklists and those points, it's important to go through those, assess them as an organization, and assess whether or not you have those frameworks, expectations in place to be able to assess performance. If the expectations aren't clear for staff, and it's very difficult to be able to evaluate their performance against that if they don't understand what the organization is asking for or needing. So it's important for the company or organization to set those expectations first, and only then can you start to evaluate your staff against that. There's a question around whether there's a different impact on organizations if performance appraisal is not monetary rewarded. It depends on the individual motivators of organizations. Whatever performance system you have in place, when you think about the motivation for individuals, almost always we see that individuals are not just solely motivated by money, but you can start to think about how adaptable that system is. It could be part money, it could be part access to training, it could be being invited to work on special high-profile projects, it could be flexible working arrangements to be able to manage your own family. It's important to be able to have those conversations with employees to understand what would be appropriate, tailored, and a motivating factor for them, as opposed to just throwing money at the problem. What is the key for KPI for workforce planning? So KPI stands for key performance indicators. So from a workforce planning context, it's important if the business needs to evolve to a certain point, making sure that the performance indicators that are then translated to employees evolve with that, so that when staff are thinking about what's needed for them to be able to deliver on their expectations, it's very clear for them that the organisation is in this direction. This means this for these jobs and these staff. Therefore, you're able to then set clear expectations and give them the best opportunity to be able to respond to that. Some employees won't perform; they'll choose not to perform. But from an organisational perspective, that becomes a different process. But you've set the expectations clearly. And the best algorithm for normalization process post PMS. I'm not familiar with PMS performance management system. I might need to take that one offline. It's quite a technical question. And what strategies are able to give employee training for future performance and overcoming redundancy? So the first step is really about trying to understand and identify what is it that the future skills we need employees to move towards. That's the first step in order to prevent and minimize situations where an employee becomes redundant or a group of skills becomes redundant. HR and workforce planning has a role to be able to work with business to articulate what that future looks like. That then can create honest and open conversations with staff to be able to say, these are the skills and capabilities we need to now evolve to. We have this time frame to be able to do it, and therefore be able to provide that opportunity and that choice for that employee to opt into that process, to retrain or to build their skills and capabilities, or opt out if that's not what they want to do and start to look at other organisations to move forward. Just reading through, rewarding and recognising system in government organisation with a huge difference to private sector. According to the living cost changes and consumer needs changing. So that can be a whole session on itself. What I might offer is there's broader questions we can work through with the organisers to be able to answer some of those posts if it's too complex at the moment. But overall, there is typically different processes for government, not-for-profit, and private organisations, just by virtue of the employment arrangements and the legislation governing employment, what employee rights have, the working arrangements and the expectations of those employees. And it's important to take what we've covered today in terms of the themes and the points and adapt that to your organisation, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. Some will have greater support and or protection. So it's important to understand what that looks like in terms of the swim lane that you can operate in within your industry or organisation. But the themes themselves are still enduring and are still relevant. In terms of that other question, the algorithm and normalization, we might take that one offline, and I'll commit to answering that one. But I think that works us through to the end of the questions. Julie, I'll just offer it to you to see if you have any closing comments before we close the session.
No, thank you, Quentin. Well, just to say that, as you can see, this is a complex area and there are always layers that are associated with performance management and lots of arms and legs to it. And we see that in our work all the time. We move in and out of basically every industry and sector, and a lot of countries as well that all have different cultural environments that we have to work in. So we recognise also that our experience is solid, many years, too many for me and some for Quentin, in this area. So I don't expect you to take it away and have it, click, I've got it, There will be questions you have, and we're very happy for you to liaise with World at Work if you wish to seek any more clarification at an individual level in terms of the information you have. But basically that is it. That is the global trend for this, and we were very happy and pleased to be able to deliver that for you. So that's all I think I need to say. Thank you.
So on that, thank you for your attendance. I think we'll close the session there. 5 minutes back in your day. And as Julie said, if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to World at Work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dipti, are you wanting to communicate anymore? I'll just close down.
I think we can disconnect, Julie.
Yes.
If you want, we can send you a separate link.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Lovely. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.